everyone. This is Saraya back with Purposeful Professional Media. And today I had the honor of sitting down with Laur Martin, a life coach extraordinaire, nonprofit builder, and now a recently minted for-profit entrepreneur. From the moment I met her on Zoom, she stood out to me for her genuine desire to help and uplift. We share so many things in common, and the conversation flowed so well that we needed a part two. Yes, this section just represents one part of her amazing story. Listen up as we talk about TikTok's impact on the self-esteem of women, going through a self-love journey in college, navigating the workplace in corporate America, and discovering if it's not right for you. We delve into it all, and true to Lauren's brand, this is a powerful episode, especially for young women. Let's take a leap and listen to Lauren's amazing story, navigating her challenges and rising triumphantly through life. Hello, everybody. This is Saraya from the Purposeful Professional, and I'm super excited to have another outstanding professional with me today. But most importantly, I want this podcast to not just be a platform for outstanding professionals, but outstanding people. I'm super excited to have Laur Martin. She's an inspirational speaker, a personal development coach, and so many other great things. I'm excited to have her on the podcast to talk a little bit about her journey, how she got into the work that she's doing, and also what her next steps are. So, Lauren, please introduce yourself to the people on the podcast.
Hi, everyone. As Surya was saying, I am kind of focused in the personal development, but more so even accountability and goal achievement space. I have a passion for uplifting women and just spreading positivity and talking about the importance of self-love.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when Lorena connected us, I geeked out over your work because my origins, similar to you, and we're going to get into your story. I started in high school with an oratory called Mirror, Mirror, Loving What You See. And I was speaking directly to the insecurities of women. And I was really, really young. I was 16 at the time. And when I figured out, or when I learned that that's your work and that's what you focus on, I was like, wow, I need to speak to her. It's funny because I think sometimes our interests, our childhood interests tend to follow us throughout life. And I think that interest in personal development has followed me throughout my life. So I was really excited, and I am really excited to get into your story and how you got into the role that you currently occupy, the niche that you occupy as well. So before we do that, we have a segment called Pop Purpose. And what we want to do is we want to discuss a pop culture topic with each guest that is relevant to their experience. So I figured, you're in the empowerment space, the goal setting space, the personal development space. Social media has a lot to do with that space. I mean, there's good, there's bad, and there's ugly in the space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read our pop purpose prompt for today, and then we're going to get into a couple of discussions or a couple of thought-provoking questions on the topic. So TikTok, dun, 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 I know TikTok, TikTok is something else these days. TikTok is synonymous with creativity, passion, entertainment, and authenticity. This is such a Gen Z response, but I really, really do love TikTok and the impact it's had on our culture. However, TikTok's positives cannot be acknowledged without mentioning its negative effects. Whether challenges promoting filtered images of beauty or even unhealthy weight and body image ideals, when it comes to women's self-esteem and self-image, TikTok is doing far more harm than good. I'm excited to get into the following questions with you regarding social media and its impact on how we view ourselves as women. So we're going to get straight to it for the first question. What has been your experience with managing social media and the pressure to conform to beauty standards on these platforms?
Yeah, no, it's definitely huge. And like you said, especially with us women, as we're kind of going through that self discovery, learning to love ourselves. For me, a huge change that I made over the last year or two that's helped me drastically is watching and being very careful about who I follow. Obviously, depending on what you're looking at on the platform, some people you may not be following and their content still pops up, but just making sure I'm following women that are uplifting, women that post real videos and pictures of their body helps me to feel a little bit better about where I'm at and learning to accept me for who me. So I think that's one important tip that I want to share with people is just being very careful about how you're curating your feed.
Yeah, absolutely. Woo. I mean, that's facts. I think even if you can limit yourself to following only the people that you do know, and the people that you do know in that group, only the people that really support you. I think we're moving into this phase where we understand that social media has to become more personal and less impersonal. And I think it's the impersonality, the impersonal nature of the platforms that can make people feel even worse about themselves because you're sitting in your, your humble abode, um, in, New York or whatever state, and you're comparing yourself to somebody who regularly vacations at Bali or St. Bart's. You're mentally doing these comparisons, and we don't understand there's Photoshop. There are all of these things in the background that affect how we view ourselves in comparison to them. We look at our real self, but we look at a filtered image of someone else. So I love that tip.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing too with social media is you have to go on and remember you're just looking at someone's highlights and a short glimpse of their life. And if it's hard for you to think about that, think about the things that you post. Are you posting when you're down, when you're crying, when you're having a rough time? Probably not. So if you aren't, other people also are not doing the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like there was a time where social media was so, I guess you could say, authentic. Like there was a time where it was actually authentic. I think as time has gone on, social media has become way less authentic. It has become more performative. It's become more like I can no longer post the pasta that I made and like people are gonna like it. People are gonna be like, oh, that's weird. And I think there were times where we'd be able to post like a movie poster and people would be like, oh, you saw that? So cool. But now it's a curated feed, a lot of brand deals, a lot of sponsorships, a lot of like, let me show y'all how I'm living. And that's creating a lot of competition. And then when it comes to beauty, as well, it's creating this standard of like this is the right way to look if you're a Black woman, this is the right way to look if you're a woman, and it causes a lot of just mental fodder. And I love what you're saying, and like not only managing your feed but understanding like you don't show your downside, so don't expect other people to be authentic, but understand that what you're seeing is inauthenticity.
Exactly. And the thing is, you brought up a really important part of that shift with social media, and you kind of touched on it, but it happened when it became monetized. So it's just like anything else. You have to think if people are doing something for money, then most likely their motives aren't going to be right. So the things you're seeing, like you said, are just motivated by money and what they can do to kind of boost them to the next level.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole like beauty industrial complex that I always say, like as someone who studied marketing, I believe you also studied marketing and business. Like their job is to keep us insecure. Their job is to keep us thinking we need this or that or any sort of beauty modification to feel good about ourselves. I mean, there's whole industries that have banked off of the insecurities of women. So I love what you're saying in that, like, understand it's about money at the end of the day, and you should put yourself before that. All right. Next question. So, what do you think the long term effects of social media challenges, such as the Miley Cyrus Arms Challenge or the overuse of filters, will have on how women will view themselves?
Research has shown that it's already having a negative impact. We're seeing higher increases of depression, higher increases of eating disorders. And I even heard the story of, unfortunately, a young woman that wanted to commit suicide because she went in to get a BBL and was told she didn't have enough fat to get it done. And so that led her to feeling like she had no worth. She just really did not love herself anymore. And like I said, ultimately wanted to end her life. So it's just like when people post these type of things and when marketers are marketing their products, they really have to think about the long-term effects that's having on real people and their real lives.
I think there are definitely long-term effects, and I think that those are things that people do need to be very considerate of. So my next question for you is, what advice would you give to women who you think are stuck in the social media matrix when it comes to developing their individuality, self-esteem, and also self-worth?
I think it's something we touched on earlier, but for me, the biggest point is really just who you surround yourself with, not only on social media or virtually, but also in real life. When you put supportive women in a community of women that are just going to fill you up, you're gonna see the benefits of it. And then that's another thing too is like even though it's hard to do in this age, but just step away from it. Whether that's you taking a break for a week, you taking a break for a month, and then ultimately, hopefully, working towards a goal of just being on it less because the more you're on that, of course, it's gonna suck you out. It's gonna make you start feeling insecure, making you question yourself whether you realize it or not. So those are my two suggestions I would have.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like when the more that we're on these sites, the more it takes a toll on our mental health. And one of the things that I love is that there are crops of apps like kind of coming up right now that are making people focus on, let's spend less time on these platforms. Let's actually like go outside, get fresh air. There are apps basically telling you when you feel that temptation to scroll, here are some things that you can do instead. And I think those are some key and critical things to managing your mental health, like you said, basically creating boundaries around it. don't see social media as your friend all the time. It's kind of like a frenemy. Like there's times where you can build a profile, you could connect with people. Like there's great things about social media. And I won't say that there aren't, but there also are there are very negative and costly things about it as well. So I think you have to embrace the good, detract the bad, and that's a really great way to deal with it. So I love that answer. So my last question for you, because I know you work in the personal development space, and as somebody who has clients and has been through, these sort of processes, what changes would you make or propose to these platforms to be healthier and more inclusive for women?
That's an interesting question. Because the thing is, it's almost too like obviously the platforms themselves, like they want people to post a type of content, but it's also what us viewers like. If people weren't going on these platforms and liking and following these creators that were posting certain type of content, then they would stop posting it. So it's almost like an inverse approach I would take is like, what do we need to start doing to start making a change on these platforms, because basically as the viewer, as a user, you're the one that has the voice. So if you start following people that are posting more positive content, being more vulnerable, then you're going to start seeing that on the platform.
You're right. It's that prompt to post more positive content, but also more authentic content. Um, and this is across all platforms. I think like there's great spaces and pockets on each platform, but it's not only just like looking at it, it's posting it, it's liking those sort of content, so you can get it in your algorithm. Like it's taking those active steps. And I think you're right. Like social media companies can do more to nudge people in that direction, and they can actually provide those nudges. Because one thing I always think of is like, why should I go on a separate app to gain some sort of clarity, a separate app that tells me to go outside or to meditate or whatever? Social media should actually start building those things in, you know?
This is sorry, you just like I thought about something. I don't know if you remember this, but it was back kind of when we were probably like right before teenage years. But Nickelodeon actually had like a time period for like 5 minutes during shows. They would say, "Hey, go outside for 5 minutes." It's like I feel like that's a very similar idea of what you're talking about, of how a company that's maybe having or promoting a different type of behavior, but they can take a break for a little bit and promote a positive or a different approach. So that's kind of what I thought about there.
Yeah, I know. I love that. Like, yeah, just like go outside and breathe. Yes, most of us, like, like early Gen Z, we were like Nickelodeon and Disney kids all the way. We actually know the Nickelodeon era. That like, people are confused about what's happening now. It's like, oh, like I remember all these shows. But yeah, I agree. Like, just finding the time to build those breaks in, and I also think like legislation is pushing social media to become more health oriented and health conscious. So as these platforms change and evolve, I think things will also change and evolve, hopefully for the better. So we're going to get into your story. Thank you for such an excellent pop purpose section. I think you provided so many great insights and nuggets that people can glean from. So we want to get into your story. And I want to start with a really powerful intro question. So when I say the words like loving the woman in the mirror, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, so for me, and I actually use that term a lot too, because at one point I literally would look at myself and just cry. I think it's about you really knowing who you are. Of course, you're going to evolve, but knowing who you are in this phase of your life, being okay with your flaws and accepting them and even loving them. So looking at in the mirror and loving the woman that is looking back at you in terms of you love who she is, who she's becoming, what she stands for, her values, the people she surrounds you or surrounds herself around. So it's a very encompassing and like holistic approach to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. When I heard that that's something that you say often, like loving the woman in the mirror, I felt like that. Wow, that's so profound. And when you told me that, I figured there's something there. Like there's something that you've had to learn. And thank you for sharing that lesson. That like there were days when you looked at yourself and cried. Not that you're not a beautiful person, but that when society's on our back, the different things that we're going through, even in school, or even outside of school, just being a teenager or a young person, it can be tough. It can definitely be tough to love yourself. And I think you probably understand this very, very deeply. But as women, we are conditioned to look at ourselves and actually pick and nitpick at ourselves. And I think I also had those days and those times where I would look in the mirror and it would just be, I'm not this, I'm not that, forgetting everything that I can bring to the table, but more so focusing on everything I thought I wasn't. So thank you for sharing that, because I think so many of us can relate to those feelings and navigating those feelings.
Yeah, and for me, it was more so too like an internal battle. Like, yes, the physical parts, I had moments when I felt like I wasn't the prettiest or there was things I could change about myself. But for me, the reason why I felt that way was because I realized for so long in my life I had been wearing a mask. And so like when I really stopped and said, "Who is Lauren?" I said my whole name because I needed to be teased. So I was like, "Who is Lauren Janelle Martin?" And that's just when it hit me. Like, I don't even know who I am. So how can I expect other people to respect me? How can I expect other people to know me if I don't even know who I am? And I think that's like that moment I was kind of referring to when I just like had a whole breakdown moment because I was just like, wow, I really need to figure out like who I am at the core so I can kind of present myself to others.
Yeah, I think that that's so dope because I think a lot of us don't understand when we are wearing the mask. And honestly, we can think of traditional beauty standards as being somewhat of a mask, right? As encouraging women to alter ourselves to fit a certain ideal. And I think what you went through is what pretty much all of us went through. You know, when you, before you know and can trust your own voice and trust who you are, sometimes we take on different phases. Like, you'll know people say like, I went through this phase in high school, or I was this person in college, or I was this person. And sometimes like I've known a lot of people for years, you know, just growing up with them as kids. And I've seen them take on different personalities, ways of dressing, ways of speaking throughout their life. And I think it's that search and that quest for self as to why sometimes we don't fully love ourselves. So thank you for introducing that. I think that's so very powerful. And we're going to get into some of those themes as we move on. So I want to get into who you are as a person. One thing we always say is that this podcast is for the people, the career, the culture. So we really feel like who you are in your career has a lot to do with who you are as a person. So for this people section, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the things that shaped your outlook when it came to wanting to do this personal empowerment work that can be difficult and something that most people shy away from, I would say. So my question for you in this section is, you're a woman who has dedicated your career to helping women find their self confidence. What drives you to make an impact in this area?
Yeah, I guess for me, I can kind of go back to kind of like you said, I was pretty early on when I got involved with like women empowerment type of work. Is actually was my freshman year of high school, so I was 14, about 10 years now, so it's crazy. But I was always a leader, always kind of a mentor in a space, and I knew I wanted to start an organization at my high school, but I had no idea like what I wanted to do. I tested out a few things, and what actually ended up sticking was Girl Up, which is a initiative started by United Nations, and essentially we fundraise and advocate for women abroad, actually, so in other countries. And that was the first time I kind of had that sense of like, wow, there's women everywhere all over this world that need our help. What can I do to help them? So that was kind of the first piece that I had. The second piece I added on was actually a very local initiative. So it was in my own community. Myself and a few of my friends would go mentor middle school girls at the middle school we attended. So like I said, it was very local initiative and it was kind of full circle of like, hey, what are some things we wish we were told as middle schoolers and how can we help them to be hopefully in a little bit better position than we currently are? So then fast forward to college, I did a similar thing, but each level is kind of where I'm at. So like in college, I started a community for college women, kind of again, similar concept of like, hey, what do I feel like I need, but it's not currently being offered? And that's actually my 501c nonprofit, Wear Your Crown. And we had a chapter at UNC Charlotte as well as UNC Greensboro. And then after I was getting ready to graduate college, I was like, what do I want this next chapter of my journey to look like? And that's when I started my for profit company, Illuminate Love. And we really focused on building self love products. So that includes affirmation, self love journal. I even got into one on one coaching then with helping women to achieve their dreams. A lot of women had these dreams of writing a book, starting a business for years, and just sat on them. So I'm like, what's stopping you? So helping them overcome those roadblocks, helping them create a roadmap to achieve their dreams, and then holding them accountable. But I guess that's kind of a long story. So to get back to your question, the reason that I got involved in this is kind of what I was telling you before, is when I went on my own journey of self-worth and discovering who I am. And I realized that when you really know who you are, at least in that moment, because again, we're constantly evolving, you really just like see life in a completely different lens. And I felt like I was able to go to that next level. I was able to ask for more, demand for more because I knew my worth. And so I wanted to equip women with that same kind of power.
Yeah. And one thing I love about your journey, and one thing that I want to highlight, is just the sense of purpose and direction that you had. Like, you were not stumbling for, I mean, there might have been times in your life where you
Yeah,
were.
I was like, we can unpack that, girl. It sounds like that now, but living in the moment and even now, I'm like, that is not true, honestly. Like, I just those things kind of, especially the first two, kind of just fell into my lap, and I was like, I kind of like where this is going.
Honestly, one of the things that I see, and like I was saying, it seems very, very pointed. And I understand, like, when we as humans have a lot of direction, like, people always say that about me too, like, you have a lot of purpose. And it's like, yeah, I do. But I also, something that I've been saying on this podcast is that we take our pain and make it our purpose. And I think whenever we're really, really called to an area, usually this is something where we had our own struggles or our own things to deal with. And what I will always say is, like, when you're an altruistic person and you're going through things in life, you don't just think about other people. You don't just think about yourself, excuse me. You think about how you can help others. So that's one thing that I see a lot in your journey and in your story. You were thinking about how to help others, even as you navigated your own battles and your own challenges. And I think what's unique about the women's empowerment work you do is it wasn't focused on just let me help you get a job. And then this is no shade. This is no shade to the organizations that do that for women. But I love the fact that you get to the root of things. You know, like, you get to the actual mindsets and things that hold us back. I want to know, like, was there ever a time when you feel like you struggled with self-confidence? And if so, like, what encouraged you to build a career out of those struggles, and then also help women in terms of a mindset to be more empowered?
Yeah, so I look at it as kind of three different layers or viewpoints or whatever you want to say, perspectives. So there's self-worth, there's self-confidence, and there's self-love. If you're just touching on the self-confidence piece, people may disagree with this, but I personally think that most people are going to struggle with that, or at least have moments that they're struggling with it for their entire life. Like, there may be times when you get better at handling those moments of when you're feeling down. But for me, at least, it's something that I'm still learning. And there's still moments where my confidence is a little low, especially when I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone. Like, right now, I'm kind of pivoting my business and doing something completely different than what I've been doing in the past. And I have to reach out to people and I have to say, like, hey, would you be interested in hiring me for this? And like, that can be a moment of where I'm like, wait, am I actually capable of this? Or like, even with my age, honestly, a lot of times I'll be the youngest person in the room, even with my corporate job, or I'll be the only Black woman in the room. And that can kind of weigh on my confidence of like, hey, do I belong here? But I have to remind myself that I am in that room for a reason. I deserve to be there. My expertise and my knowledge is needed in that room. So for that piece, I think that's an ongoing journey and something that, like I said, you just kind of have to learn how to manage. In terms of self-worth, that's kind of what I was speaking on earlier. And I think that's how I was able to get to that place of like, hey, I deserve to be here. Because if you don't know your worth and you don't even think you're worthy of being there, then how are you going to walk into a room confidently? Or how are you going to be able to kind of make other people feel like you deserve to be there? So I think that's kind of that piece. And the self-love, that's kind of a very holistic approach. So we won't dive deeply into that unless you'd like to. But I think that's just kind of a combination of one, it could be loving your body, it could be loving yourself enough to have that confidence, or loving yourself enough to feel that you're worthy. But I kind of like to break it down into those three different categories.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And I would also love to hear your definition of self love. I think when you broke it down that way, it made me realize that many of us as women struggle with one, if not all, of the selves. You know, I think, like, I love your definition of self confidence. Like, number one, it's like stepping in. But I think also confidence, like you said, is something that can waver. Like, confidence is kind of like, I think of it in the same vein that I think of like happiness versus joy. Like, I can have joy, but I can struggle with happiness at times. I think of it as confidence. Like, I can know and understand who I am fundamentally, and I can be conscious of that or even be proud of that. But like you said, confidence can sometimes be based on your familiarity with a situation. Like, if you go and skydive and you're like skydiving in the Bahamas, how many of us really have confidence to just jump out the plane? Like, it's tough. It's like when you're in a new situation, you might deal with those hesitancies. But I love how you talked about how self-worth and then self-love are like the foundation almost for like self-confidence, because when you understand your worth, like you talked about your life, like you're going into these corporate spaces, being an entrepreneur, doing many things that you're alluding to something that I think triggered a lot in us, imposter syndrome. Even when you are qualified, even when you do have all the credentials, you don't feel like you are enough. So I think you're alluding to that, and I think that that's so powerful because so many of us as people and as women, it's like we're missing one of the selves. I can't even say I have all three. Even now, I'm looking back and I'm like, let me look at myself and develop myself.
And that's why, even with my language with Illuminate Love, in terms of our mission statement, even my products, I was very, very careful with my wording. And obviously, the consumer may not catch up on that, but for me being the founder, it was so important how I worded things. And even with our mission statement, it says ongoing journey, because I think a lot of people think of these things as a destination. And it's like, no, 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 no. Even if you get to a place where like your self love is here, there may be something in life that makes it drop a little bit. So then you have to keep going with that journey. And then something I thought about while you were talking with, and like it triggered for me with self love is like, wow, did I already lose it? Hopefully it'll come back, but it was something that I had about self love that I was like, okay, that would be a good connection to make for the audience, but hopefully it'll come back to me.
No, it will come back, and we might end with like your definition of self love because I think like I would love to hear your core definition of that. So we've been talking a lot about like who you are, who you were growing up, and like some of the different things that you navigated. I also you told me that you grew up in a predominantly white area, and I also know that having our identity not always be as represented can sometimes have a lot to do with how we view ourselves.
A lot,
Like I
a
think
lot of
self esteem.
it.
Yeah, no, not even sometimes. It does have a lot to do. Like it is how we view ourselves a lot of the time, because what we see, like perception is reality. That's one of my favorite quotes. What we see shapes what we think, and what we think shapes how we feel about ourselves. So I want to know, like, growing up in like predominantly white environments, like, tell me about some of the lessons you learned about yourself and growing up as a young Black woman in those spaces, especially when it comes to self love, self worth, all the things we've been talking about during this conversation.
Well, I think that's what I mean by I was wearing a mask for such a long part of my life and I didn't even realize it. Like, I'm not saying I wasn't being myself, but it was such a different version of Lauren from like all the way up until 18 when I went to college. And the funny thing is, like, I technically went to PWI for college, but it was still such a different environment and at least somewhat diverse compared to where I went to school and growing up in my community. So that allowed me to come do a little bit more discovery, feel a little bit free to like, especially for my hair. That was one of the biggest ways that I kind of like embrace who I was and trying to figure out what hairstyles I wanted to wear. Because growing up, I always wore my hair straight, no matter what. I was trying to get my hair like down to my butt, even if that meant I wasn't getting trims and I wasn't really properly taking care of my hair. Because for me, everyone else it was told that you're supposed to have straight hair, it's supposed to be long hair. But then I got to college, I finally got more comfortable wearing my hair naturally. So just even something as small as that can be big. Or I remember too, like, especially even around fourth or fifth grade, you think, oh, girls really don't care about their body. No, I remember coming home to my mom with puberty, I was starting to get a little curvy and the other girls were kind of staying slim and thin. And I told her, I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I like this? And of course, she like had to sit me down and have a conversation. But I just think it's all those little pieces. And then, especially for me too, like I was in gifted programs, and usually I was the only person or one of the few people that looks like me. And so feeling like, well, like, do I belong here? Like, why is there no one else like me in these programs or in these classes? Um, and there were even times I will be honest too, with my accomplishments, even like leadership people at schools or teachers would kind of give you the side eye of like, that doesn't sound right. So it's just like a combination of so many things that you aren't able to really reflect on as you're young and going through it, but you can reflect on later on into your adulthood.
Yeah, I think that's definitely so true. And one of the things that you're touching on is you're touching on the reality of like what it feels to grow up in a space where you are not the dominant representation. And I think honestly, like I went to a PWI for college too, and a lot of what you're talking about, I saw in the PWI space. And I also, and for those who want to know, podcast people, PWI is predominantly white institution because I try to define the terms for y'all. But yeah, like I was in that space as well. And yes, being a curvier girl is sometimes looked down upon, or even not having the natural hair that they're comfortable with or that they're used to. You know, sometimes our braids or even our dreads or whatever style we have isn't always seen as being acceptable. So I can only imagine like having to go through that from childhood up, and definitely how it made you have to have, like you said, those conversations with your mom and have to sit down and really think critically about loving yourself as a young Black woman, because it ain't easy. And then you talked about being in the gifted program and not seeing representation. And then, of course, dealing with, you know, like whatever, like systemic biases as well. That's tough. That's tough.
And then also too, like, I don't know if you want to get this far along, but just speaking about my experience with corporate America. And the thing is, wait, before I even get there, speaking on childhood, recently my mom, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I was kind of sharing a story with her, emotions I felt growing up. And she's like, I'm really sorry that like we put y'all in that environment, meaning my brother and I. And I was like, honestly, mom, like you don't have to apologize because the way our society is structured, you all did that because you knew it would give me the best launch pad for my future. And I'm very grateful for that because I did have a good education. I was able to be very successful in college and even corporate America because of the background I had. So it's like interesting too, just to think about like the choices your parents even have to make. Especially I know like the area that you live in, but Charlotte is very segregated. So that's why they had to make the decision of like, do we want to live in this type of environment and allow our children to go to better schools? But knowing that, like you said, I wouldn't necessarily have people that looked like me. But going back to the other story I was going to share is like, even at my job, I was the only Black female on my team. And so every time I went into meetings, it's like sometimes I really felt challenged by certain people. And so feeling that weight of always having to prove yourself, always having to be on point, because I will say a lot of days I was the first one in the office, last one to leave, because it just felt like I had to work so much harder than everyone else. Because if I perform the same way they're performing, then, you know, so
Woo. All right.
yeah, I'm like, we're going deep. I didn't even know we were
Woo.
talk about
I'm
that. So I'm just
like,
like, I
this
was
is bringing
like
me
going
all
into,
the way
and I kind of
back.
knew that from my experience in the educational world, but just going into corporate America, I'm like, and maybe honestly too, maybe some of it is in our head. I don't know, but I just was like, it
Mm,
just felt like so much extra pressure I was putting on myself for sure.
yeah. A lot to unpack with that. There's a lot to unpack what you said. And I want to thank you, and thank you for your vulnerability and sharing those things, because I think oftentimes when I hear these sort of conversations, it ends at like, oh, you know, I had the best education and it was great for me. We almost never talk about like the fact that even after, you know, going to these educational institutions, it continues in corporate. It continues sometimes in our minds and how we view ourselves and how we see ourselves. So I'm grateful that you shared that. I could only imagine, like I've heard, you know, things about being in the South and growing up in the South. And that also adds a certain layer to it. You know, I was blessed to be in New York and grow up in a multicultural city. So but we still did deal with issues of segregation that, you know, very similarly, the city that I live in, New Rochelle, is divided, pretty much divided on racial lines. We have a north side and we have a south side.
That's kind of like how Charlotte is, except for us, it's a circle. So the outside of Charlotte is where all the rich white people. It's starting to somewhat change, but that's how historically. And then, like you said, the center is yeah. So it's very very similar.
So parents do feel this tie between like I'm trying to give my children the very, very best of education and resources, but at the same time, the best might not look like, or the best might not promote the growth of people who look like
You have
them.
to
You
make
know, and I think that
sacrifices. It's like a trade-off, or I should say almost like a trade-off system. Like if you get this, then you might lose that. So which one do you value more type of deal? And the thing is too, we also even have to, if you want to really get this deep, talk about how we were fortunate to even be able to make that choice, because we were only able to do that because my parents were making enough money to put us in a good neighborhood. But if we didn't even have that, we wouldn't have had any choices. I would have just had to go to the school that was performing less and probably wouldn't have allowed me to get the same place I was at. Or even if we want to unpack how my parents had to spend thousands of dollars to put me in all these pre-college programs so that I could get a full ride at scholarship. So it's just like there's so many things that like we could really spend time unpacking if, I guess I don't know how deep you want to go there, but
we go, no, like here we go deep. Here we go deep. I feel like I am like low key, like I'm a studier of people. I love to hear about people's lives and experiences. So please feel free to talk about anything that you feel moves you. I definitely think that's great. And I think that we will get into some of those niches as we move through in your story. We talked a lot about like college, different things and experiences. I want to talk a little bit about your first career aspiration because I see you as being someone who's multi talented and multifaceted. And usually we have a first career aspiration that makes people go, I didn't know you wanted to be that. But when we share those aspirations, it adds more layers to who we are as a person. So I want to know, like, what was your first career aspiration? Did you end up pursuing this aspiration? If not, how did it end up shaping your career goals as you moved forward?
Smiling so hard right now because I recently did a deep dive reflection of this for myself, and like it was amazing. I like that's why I love reflecting and just sometimes writing things down just for the sake of it, because at least for me, writing really helps me to go that extra layer deep. And I was thinking for me, that was definitely being a teacher, like hands down. Like for the longest, I wanted to be a teacher. Literally had like a whiteboard. I'd put all my stuffed animals up and we would have class. I was that crazy student, and even my whole family was like, "When you're crazy," I would have my parents take me to the teacher store all the time and get like a workbook. Like I wanted to be a teacher, and so many teachers growing up were even like, "Oh, you're like you definitely have the qualities to be a teacher." But unfortunately, there were outside external people, I will say mainly family members are like, "Lauren, you do not want to be a teacher." I'm not sure if you're familiar with how teachers are treated here in North Carolina, but the pay is awful and they work so hard. So that was the main reason why they were just kind of looking out for me. And so I think it was around high school when I switched off to more of a business track because I have always had a love for business and kind of entrepreneurship spirit. But yeah, it was definitely a teacher. And I think why I'm smiling so hard too is because my next business venture, which I know we're going to talk about later on, is getting me back to that track of being a quote unquote teacher, because what I realized during my reflection is I was writing down why did I want to be a teacher and what are the things I like about being a teacher. And nowadays there's so many other job titles or career tracks that do very similar things, but they just don't have the title of a teacher. So like for me, what I loved is seeing people, the growth. So being able to help somebody and seeing their growth take off, and that's literally what a coach does, right? And so that's why I'm like, I'm kind of smiling because it's so funny that like I had such a strong passion and desire to be a teacher, kind of was redirected due to, like I said, low wages, things of that nature. But now I'm kind of finding my way back to that, the root of my motivators or why I wanted to be a teacher, just in a different way.
I'm starting to realize so many entrepreneurs that I talk to, they always say that they wanted to be teachers or psychologists. And I think it goes back to the fact that if we think of the role that teachers play in society or even psychologists, they help people to actualize. And an entrepreneur is someone that sees the potential in an idea and grows it, right? And develops it. So because I was like, yeah, I wanted to be a teacher too. And they talked me out of it. Same
Yep.
thing with you. They told me like, the
Yeah,
way that you work, no, 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 no. We need you to be an attorney. We need you to
that's
be.
literally
So I
what it
was on the
was.
either pre law, pre med. People were stuffing that down my throat. Like either you're going to be one of these things. I remember one time a young lady came up to me and I was in high school. She's like, "You need to be a judge." Like people would tell me like everything that they felt like I needed to be. And I also had that aspiration because I am attracted to the potential in things. And I realized I'm like, okay, so I'm attracted to the potential in things. And I love that you did like the deep work and the soul work. I love that you do that regularly. Because a lot of the time when I talk to people about their careers, I do this for a living for this podcast. People don't always have that awareness of like, I wanted to do this, but why did I want to do it? Let me extract the why?
And that's what I am so passionate about, because I'm I guess because I always think about things from a very deep perspective. It was very shocking to me when I realized the majority of people, the majority of companies, just our world does not really work that way. And so that's why everything I do, especially if I'm doing any coaching services or working with someone in that way, I force them to go deep. Like even my products with affirmation cards. I remember I bought a pack of affirmation cards one day and it was like, light a candle, take a bath. I was like, this is not affirmation cards. What is this? And that was really the like what drove me to create my own, because I'm like, this is literally trash and they're charging people like $20 for this. So with my affirmation cards, I literally have an actual affirmation on the front. And I was like, this is still not deep enough for me. So on the back, there are reflection questions that relate to the affirmation to force you to take it that layer deep. Because I think so many people just go through emotions in their life. And that's why they look up at age 40, age 50, and they're like, how did I get here? I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. I don't feel purposeful. So that's why in order to fill those things and to get to where you want to be, you have to do the deep work. You have to do the work.
Ooh, thank you. Thank you for that thank you for that reminder because I don't know if you got the same thing, but I would get growing up, like Soraya's just too deep. Like you be doing too much. But I always thought I'm the same. I'm like, wow, like I'm the same. Like I'm always thinking about like how can I really truly understand myself? And when you said you extracted the lessons of like, why do I want to be a teacher? Like you were able to apply that to your career. I'm like, wow, that's a pattern that I'm seeing in a lot of entrepreneurs and creators. It's this thing of like, you either really wanted to be a teacher or you wanted to be a psychologist. You wanted to be somebody who, worked on the potential within others, within ideas. You see the potential. And I think that's a unique way to view the world because and we're going to talk a little bit about college and being a business major. I also went to business school for undergrad and you're funneled into existing structures. You're told to work with companies that are already winning, like work for a Fortune 500 or a blue chip firm. Don't work for a startup. Don't teach those kids that we don't know if they're going to succeed. Business school teaches you very quickly about the ROI of things and to invest in things that we believe have an expected outsized return. But I think when you are an entrepreneur, when you are a teacher, when you are anybody who I would say is attracted to the potential of things, you go the opposite. You actually want to fix the things that people might not see as being worth it. You actually want to renovate, you want to remodel, you want to do something new with what you already have. And I see that as being a huge pattern.
'Cause, like, even growing up, I'm laughing because my mom was, like, asking me questions, but I literally would be that child who'd ask why, and then you give me a response, I'm like, "Why? Why?" Until I got the answer that I was satisfied with, because like you said, I feel like am a problem seeker, and I always like to find a better way of doing things, because I do think there's always ways that we can optimize everything in our life, whether that's, like, your morning routine or literally just, like, anything you think of, I am always that person who's like, "Okay, how can I do this better? How can I do that better?"
Yeah. So speaking of that, I want to take us from like that early interest in teaching into corporate America and your path as a business major. You were a business major, and I know all about that world of finding the right job or the perfect corporate job to complement your business degree. Some people say they go together. Like, hey, like you got this business degree, especially from a reputable school. We should see you working for X, 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 and X. People have kind of like a vision of the perfect corporate job, high five figures or six-figure job to complement your business degree. So, how did you navigate like the post college maze after graduating with a business degree? And then what made you eventually decide to take the risk and venture into the arenas that you work in now?
Yeah, so in terms of finding my job, I'll be honest. And that's probably why I struggled so much with like this entrepreneurship of like the unknown is because up until like that point, everything in my life had gone according to my plan. And it really hadn't been much turmoil, I guess is a good way of putting it. So, to quickly explain how I got my job after college, I literally interned with them before my senior year. They offered me a job, I accepted it. I didn't even apply for any other positions. I applied for the only them. And like I said, I got the job. And so I think for me, I kind of approached the job search process very similar to how I did with my college search in terms of I knew if I wanted to, I could really push myself and go for those Ivy League schools or those other schools like that. But I realized it was more important for me to be happy with where I was. And so that's why I ended up ultimately going to UNC Charlotte, is because I stepped on their campus and I was like, I absolutely love this. Like it felt like home where I needed to be. And before that, I was actually if you live in North Carolina and you're smart, everyone's like, oh, you have to go to Chapel Hill. So before that, I was a Chapel Hill, like diehard. I was like, I'm going to Chapel Hill. I toured the school and I was like, and I even did a couple of programs with them. I was like, I do not like this school. Like I was walking onto the campus, going into the classrooms, and I was just like, this is not a good fit for me. And what's crazy is I applied to Chapel Hill, I got accepted. And even then, even though I knew I didn't want to go to school there, it was so hard for me to decline it because of, like you said, those expectations of what people expect you to do. And so it's like you have to learn how to do what's best for you and ignore all the other opinions and things that people say, because even after I officially announced where I was going to school, there were classmates, like teachers, other people like, oh my gosh, like why didn't you go to Chapel Hill? Like so much better than Charlotte. And I'm like, because I will be happy at Charlotte and that's where I wanted to go. So sorry, that was like a long story, but basically you're saying I apply that same approach to where I want to work. So like, yeah, I could have applied to Google, I could have applied to all the large companies, but I knew I wanted to do something local in Charlotte. And so Red Adventures was a really good opportunity for that because it was kind of like a large scale company, but it was so close to home. And so that's where I ended up working for about a little under a year.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. I love that story, and I love how you're contextualizing like also your path from college through literally the career that you began to launch, because it does start with those high school admissions expectations. And I have to tell you, like, please, anybody listening, do not feel the need to go to a school that you are not comfortable with. On the other side of these prestigious universities are often people who are extremely uncomfortable in the environments they're in. And I think people have to know, like, we talking about this a lot, this whole interview. Trade-offs are always made. Like, you're never going to really find a path that is like 100% good. But what I will say is when you are 18 to 22, 23, 24, it matters that you are in a space that you feel comfortable in. And I want to applaud you for making that decision, because many people chose prestige. And I can say going to a prestigious school is great, but it's not for everybody. And like you said, it's the same with a job. A prestigious job is great, but it's not for everybody. I think like the older I got, the more I realized it's important to be in spaces where you feel you belong. Because if you don't, if you don't, that like mental weight of feeling like you have to, we're talking about that today, like wearing the mask. I went to one of those universities that people might, send their kids to and say, well, this is a great school. And I loved going there, but there were also certain things that I dealt with, especially as a Black woman there, that I tell and I warn people about just chasing prestige. So when I was in college and by the time I graduated, I was like, I just want peace. Like, I just want to be happy. I just want somewhere where I can feel like I can be myself. And it's funny that that was your thought process all the way through, because I think many of us, some of us are even still stuck chasing prestige, and we're not thinking about like, where do I actually feel connected, you
Yeah,
know?
and I just want to add on to that too is like, especially with college, it's very important to think about your end goal. So, like, the way I approach, especially undergrad, is like for me, I knew I didn't want to go to grad school right away. I knew I was just going to get a job in business field. So I'm like, really, at the end of the day, as long as I have a 4 year degree, it does not matter where I go. It's not going to kill me. But like, I know if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, sometimes it does matter where you go to undergrad. So my biggest advice for people thinking about college is think about your end goal, and is the school you go to really going to determine your end goal or change it that much? And if not, then go, like you said, where you're happy, where you're comfortable, where you fit in best. And another thing to think about for me that weighed on my decision is like, if I go to one of those prestigious schools, I'm just going to be lost in the pond. I'm just going to be another smart kid at another school. Versus if I go to another school, I'm not saying there aren't smart students there too, but if you're at the top of the class, you're going to stand out a little bit more. So that's how I was able to get a full ride scholarship. That's how I was able to be in BHP, which is Business Honors Program, because I was able to stand out at another institution. So I just encourage people to think about that as well.
Yeah, definitely think about that. And also think about the fact that like certain institutions come with a lot of competition. And it's not to say that competition isn't good, but competition can be tiresome. The podcast people know I've had to leave student groups in college due to the competition. It became toxic. It became like everything we did was a competition. Meetings, we'd be one-upping each other. There's a different culture in certain spaces. And I caution people to be wary of not just the prestige, but the culture that you are joining, because it will shape who you are. It will change the way how you think, and you might end up becoming something very far from what you were when you first started. I love that because you were able to really understand, number one, who am I? Where would I fit best? But also like my end goal, like who do I want to be after this? And I think you see peers, like I've seen peers lose themselves chasing jobs, chasing acceptance, chasing I've seen Black women lose ourselves, because we're talking about women today, and women lose ourselves trying to appeal to employers that, let's keep it real, in male dominated industries. I've seen a lot of us lose our luster, lose our sparkle, lose what makes us special, because we're trying to be other. And that's why I have this podcast, because it's like I want us to all be able to get back to ourselves and get back to the core of who we are, because who you are matters, you know?
And no, you just really spoke to my experience of why, like, ultimately I had to leave where I was. I was definitely on a trajectory to have very high achievements and be in high places, but I was not recognizable to my friends, to my family. My complete personality changed, and that's when I was just like, I can't do this anymore, because no job, no paycheck, no title is worth, like you said, losing who you are.
Woof. Okay. I feel like this conversation is just enlightening me. I feel like I'm getting all the inspiration I need to like continue this year on this like high of just inspiration, authenticity, like all positivity, like all of the things that are coming through this conversation. And I want to kind of tell you that I can relate to that experience because I worked many jobs. Like I actually did so many jobs. And for those who know, the podcast people know my story. I actually graduated without a job. And I tried so hard to like fit back into corporate because I was like, okay, like maybe this is what everybody else is doing. And I actually was going to work in agency marketing and advertising. So I was going to be like one of those, marketing, advertising, think like RGA. Like I was going to work at campaigns, and agency. I was like, okay, like this is great. Things fell through. God took over. And he was like, one of the things that he said to me is that like your personality matters. I don't want you to be in a place where what I put inside of you is compromised. And I think like I wanted so bad to fit in. I wanted so bad to be like everyone else. But then I began to realize, like, for many of us, I mean, you're a leader, you're a visionary, your personality is your power. It is your power. And when you lose that, it's like you're losing, it's like Black Panther. Like if they lost vibranium, what would Wakanda be? That's just my example, throwing that in there. If we lose our power, like who would we be? Like that define our power defines who we are. And if your personality is your power, which for many of us it is. I think that you have to think about protecting that and treating that like an asset, and understanding in due time you will succeed. I was told I was too loud. I was too outgoing. I was too positive. I was told I was too everything when I was in corporate spaces. I was told I was too everything. And it took a time for me to like really sit down and think, can I really be myself in these spaces? No, because I couldn't, I had to leave or because I couldn't, God made it so that nothing worked out. He took over and said, I want you to do work that is meaningful to you. And I was like, okay, well, meaningful and broke.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna
Meaning,
be real, real. Like he will literally close doors, and on our end, it can be a little frustrating because, like, I'll just go a quick scenario what I've been going through is like I left my job about a year ago now, and so there's been times of off and on where I've been trying to re-enter corporate America, and I'm applying for like so many jobs, and so many of them, like I say, and other people like, why did you not get that job? I'm like, I have no idea. So it's just like I really, like you said, I agree that he closes doors that he's like, no, 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 I have better in store. There's people waiting on you because that's what we have to remember too, especially like with you and with, or I guess myself too, is because we're directly working with other people trying to work on their goals and their dreams. It's like, I'm not saying they can't accomplish it without us, but we may be holding a piece of advice. We may be holding a tool. May know somebody in our network that's really going to help them to excel. So we have to keep moving so that we can help other people keep moving.
yeah. Wow. 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 Cause I had that conversation the other day. I had that conversation with someone who thanked me for doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm a baby in this game. What? You're thanking me for doing what I'm doing? I'm thanking y'all for even believing in this. But I think the hope and the inspiration you provide so many people with when you're on the right path. And I was praying to God and I was like, God, show me that I'm on the right path. And there were times when I would just get messages from people who I haven't spoken to in years. And they'd be like, I see you, keep going. Like I see what you're doing and I'm inspired.
When we think nobody is watching, because I've had that too. It's like you think nobody's watching, and you're like, "Oh, this post isn't getting any views," but then it's like you get these random messages, like you said, of people maybe behind the scenes that are seeing you, but they aren't saying anything out loud. They aren't liking your stuff. But people are always watching you, and we just have to keep that in mind too.
People are always watching. Like for you, like we connected through Lorena, and then Lorena's been on this podcast, so the podcast people know her. We connected through her, but we were on LinkedIn, and I would see like you're unlocking your potential. I would see the articles. I would see, so I was seeing that, and I was getting an understanding of who you are, and that's the power of like when you're authentic and you step into the spaces and be authentic. There are people who have reached out to me. I've met them in passing, but because we connected on social media, they kept on seeing me. They kept on seeing what I'm working on. And they were like, wow, when this came up, I thought of you first. Like this, I thought of you first. And mind you, these aren't the people that are like liking, and because for various reasons, we don't like or comment, or just the fact that I'm coming up in the conversation, just the fact that I know like you're coming up in so many conversations, that's a testament to the fact that you're on the path, because when you're inspiring people and you're uplifting people and your presence is providing people with a new sense of perspective or a new sense of hope, that in itself is a success. And I've been kind of like rewiring because I've been saying, like, I'm not successful. My peers make much more money than I do at this stage in my life. And I kept on saying, like, I'm not successful yet. I didn't reach where I wanted to be. But God was like, you're defining success in monetary terms.
I was just about to say that in the way the world views success, and we have to stop doing that, especially when you're doing purposeful work. Because, like you said, it may not be in the way that they are. Honestly, the way I think about it too, especially as an entrepreneur, is like, yeah, right now they may be quote unquote ahead of us, but we can grow exponentially. Versus they can only grow so much if you're talking about people that like a corporate job. So it's just like I don't think about it from that perspective because, like you said, it can very easily put you down or feel like I'm not doing enough, but you just have to remember the people that you're touching, the lives that you're improving, that's priceless. So,
Yeah. And then, the perils of like beyond that, like also living at home, like not being able to afford your own place because you're building your business, like all of that. And then since I've been at home, I've been, caretaking as well because I have a grandmother that is super elderly. And then my sister also is developmentally disabled, like all these things. I've been dealing with these things on top of my work. And people would probably look at me and say, well, you went to this school. Why didn't you just get this top job and just get the hell out of here? It's like, I tried. But God said no. God said no. And there are things that God is building in me in this season that I know he might be building some similar things in you, like the ability to wait on him. Like you said, exponential growth. Like when God is ready, when I tell you, like when God is ready to like accelerate, he will accelerate beyond what people can understand, and I'm learning that now in this season.
that's so good. And like you said, it can be hard, but that's again why for me, I'm almost like I still get on social media in terms of like liking people's stuff, but I don't post anything, at least on Instagram. Like I haven't posted in like 2 years because I feel like I'm at this season right now of where I could care less if other people know what's going on in my life. I'm in a building season right now, or like my boyfriend and I, we call it a heads down. We're both in our heads down, like grinding season because we realize that we have such like high goals for ourselves. So if we want to reach those goals, we have to work now because this time, especially before you have any real responsibilities, before you have family, is the only time in your life. Like you said, we're both living at home. Like, when else are we going to be able to not have rent or mortgage? So, like, you just really have to utilize this time that we have now to build the type of lifestyle and type of life you want to have.
It's like you spend your 20s grinding, so your 30s you can explore. And my mom says something and she's like, sometimes you have to be old before you're young. And I'm like, yeah, my mom says that. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, you have to be old before you're young. And that makes a lot of sense because I think like when you're an entrepreneur at such a young age, the way that you move and the maturity you have to have is like that much. It's like it's like you have to move like an elder. Like, you're managing people, you have interns, you have people, like you have to move like an elder. And people would say, well, you're young, like go out, have fun, like forget about the business, forget about your purpose, like just throw that in the garbage. You got time. But when I think of that all the time. Like sometimes you have to be old before you're young. And I tell myself, if I build what I want to see happen in the world. And one of my mentors in my head, she's now passed, but she said that money flows to creative ideas. Where creativity is, the money will follow. And I always think of that. And I said, if I dedicate my early career to pushing creative and breakthrough ideas, what can come of my life? I'll be old now. I'll be the person that's not partying now. I'll be the person that's having my head down, like you said, now. But as I get older, I can be young. Like I can have the youth of not having to worry about bills, about, where if I'm gonna get fired, like I have the youth that I wish I had when I was younger?
And two things, at least for me, I'm sure you probably can relate to this. I've been very fortunate that I never had the desire to go out partying or go in clubs or any of that. So even though I'm not doing those things, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. Like I literally have zero desire to do those type of activities. And then another thing is like when you find your passion or when you find your calling or when you find a thing you're supposed to be working on, like you're going to want to work on that. Like for me, there's literally been several nights I can't even go to sleep, like because I'm just so excited, like pumping out work or building business ideas. So I really do believe that when you find the right thing, you're going to want to invest your time and resources into building that out.
I'm sniffing a part two.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
I
sniffing
like keep
part
looking at
two.
time like,
I'm sniffing part two. Yeah, no, we're definitely gonna need a part two
Yeah.
because the way that the wisdom that you drop, like when you come in and you speak, you're dropping gems. And I don't want to rush your story or rush your process. I want to respond to what you said though about like being consumed by your purpose. So I was watching an interview, and I don't know if you know her. Her name is Olamide. I think her last name is Olowe. She was the youngest Black woman to raise, I think, over $10 million in venture funding. I'm not
I need to
sure,
look her up,
but
but I don't think her name's
I
not
will
ringing
share
a
the
bell.
resource with you afterwards, manifesting her being on this podcast because she's another one that I think has a story to tell. And she said that ideas are like spirits, they fall on people. And I was thinking, I was like, man, like people who are not like, I say that there's two types of entrepreneurs. There's self-driven and there's God-driven. Those who are God driven, it's almost like you have an idea that arrests you. Like you can't sleep because it's like, man, it's like, if we think back to, because I know you're a Christian in the Bible, how God would wake people out of their sleep. Like I've had those moments where God has woke me up out of my sleep to write things down. And literally when I see like them today, I'm like, shoot, God was speaking to me in that moment. And if I didn't answer, that spirit would have fell on somebody else and I would have saw them build what I was told to build. So I think when you're God driven in this process, you will have like what you said, the passion that you have where sometimes people can't even pull you away from that work because it's almost like there's this spiritual conviction that you have that like Olamide said, the spirit fell on you and you just get to working. Like I think that's how I knew I was supposed to be an entrepreneur because I knew like God had spoken to me and I had taken that so seriously.
And I think for me, I can relate, but in a different way. Kind of how we know like God speaks to people, but differently. So for me, I feel like he's been using me almost like a Lego pieces, meaning like each piece he like builds on top of the next one, on top of the next one, and keeps getting me closer to my ultimate, or not ultimate, because sometimes people have multiple, but where I'm supposed to be right now in this chapter. And I feel like a lot of times he's had to redirect me, and it's been through closed doors. So a lot of times I'll be like, oh, I think this idea is what I should be working on next. It's very difficult and it's very, you can just tell his hand's not necessarily on that. So then it'll redirect me to the next thing. And so I feel like I keep getting closer and closer and closer to what I'm working on. And that's why I'm just really excited about what my new idea is because I have gotten a completely different feeling and different even reaction from people. So yeah, I can relate to that.
I love that you said that because God also does that. Like he uses something to be the stepping stone to another thing. So what worked in one season doesn't always work in the next. And that's why now I love that entrepreneurs that are Christian are talking about sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. Cause I feel like we were afraid to say that. Cause it's like when you say Holy Spirit, it's like, Holy Spirit, is that a ghost? People get scared. But when you're sensitive to God's voice, he will tell you when it's time to move. And I wouldn't say it's that those ventures failed, because I don't believe that you fail in entrepreneurship. You just learn and you take what you learned from the first one and you apply it to the second one. That's why I never shame entrepreneurs from starting a new business because it's like you're not sunk costing. Like you're actually saying, okay, it's time. There's a time to build and there's a time to burn down and build anew. And I think that that's the process of entrepreneurship. Let me just end it here and say that we had such a great time just like discussing all of these topics. I think like I'm really honored to discuss all these things with you. I'm grateful that Lorena connected us and that we were able to have this conversation because I think that there's some connections that are like God connections. And I really do feel like this is a God connection. Thank you, Lauren. Do you have any like remaining thoughts before we end this episode?
I guess we mainly talked about like the people. So I guess it's just like about your journey. I think so many people get so caught up on, am I making the right decision? And they get paralyzed. And I remember talking to a lot of people about this during college, like my close friends, because it was that time of college where you had to kind of decide what your next move is going to be. And they just like, I'm so scared of making the wrong decision. And I used to think that way until I shifted my mindset. And especially if you're a Christian, in terms of like, I just truly believe that God has a way of redirecting us even if we go down the wrong path. So don't become so fearful of making the wrong decision that you don't make a decision. Just make the decision you feel like is the best, with the information and resources you have at hand, and the rest will work itself out.
Yeah. All right. Y'all heard her. Y'all heard her. Okay. All right, Lauren, take care.
Thank you, too.
Ooh, this episode was a whole word. In part one, we delved into it all, from developing self-love as a Black woman when existing in predominantly white spaces, empowering other women to love themselves even as we face our own self-love struggles, managing our mental health and the pressures of our teens and 20s. This part was an appetizer, and the next round is an entree. Anyway, this is Soraya, and we're out with the podcast for the people, your career, and the culture. Let's continue this conversation and click on the next episode to access more of Lauren's story.